Now, our second guy, I think, is a little bit less exciting. I'm really actually curious to see your evaluation on him. Nick Hampton from Appalachian State actually has a very similar build, but less length at 6'3", 235. Very productive at App State. Now, I saw a guy that has a high motor, a really strong stand-up rusher, was not asked to play outside of that role like Will McDonald was at Iowa State. But Hampton did well for what he was asked to do. I see a guy that shows up, makes the plays, and is in the right position when he needs to be. But I think that there's a lot of physical limitations that I'm not going to be super aggressive on him. Like he's a rotational pass rusher to me at the next level, and we'll get a little bit more into that grading. But again, I think there's a lot of physical limitations that are going to hinder a guy like Nick Hampton who doesn't have as much length.
This is a weird body type look at a Nick Hampton, right? He is verified in the spring. We'll see what the official measurement is for the bowl season and combine, but he was 6'2" and 3/8, 224 pounds, 34 inch arms though. So not as good a length as Will McDonald, but still very good length for his size, right? Like that's a really good length for a 6'2" and a half player. We'll call him that. This for me, Joe, is a Uchenna Nwosu type of player. This is a Josh Uche type of player. They're guys that are edged by their edges in the sense that they have some true outside trackability, but they're also players that need to play a little bit of a different role at points on the field as well, because he's a kid that at 224 pounds, I mean, he's 6'2" and 3/8, right? So I don't think he's going to be able to get up to like 250. I think he's going to be more in that 240 range if he fills out properly, maybe 245. So you might be able to get a little bit extra weight on his frame, but I don't think he has the frame like Will McDonald to carry that weight as appropriately as what Will can. So I think that when you look at a Nick Hampton, this is a player that I think in early downs, he needs to be a Sam linebacker, right? He needs to be that type of player. But then in obvious passing situations or third downs, he can be that extra rusher, right? He can come up online and to do those things. And I think that he can give you some spurts early on I think that he can be a nice designated pass rusher. I think he can do those things, right? Because he has some outside trackability. He's got a little burst to him. Not as bendy as Will, but he's got some nice outside trackability, and he's got decently strong hands. So as a pure outside track dude, I think there's things to like about Nick Hampton. It's just the size I think is a little troubling because I just don't see as much developmental upside to his frame. So I see a kid that's going to have to make a living as a Sam linebacker early on, and then use that designated pass rusher ability in the right opportunities to make an impact. Because I do think he can do that in the right role, but this is a very dependent player for me to land with a good defensive coordinator that understands how to use him properly. Because I think that you've seen Uchenna Nwosu was like a 4th-round pick coming out of USC, right? A Josh Uche coming out of Michigan, I think was like a 3rd-round pick, but he didn't really find his role until a little bit, until like this year, for instance. It took him a couple years. So I think you can find a role for Nick Hampton and he can be a really successful player. I just think it really is dependent on what defensive scheme and what coaching staff he lands in.
Yeah, for me with Hampton, the play strength is not anywhere near as good as Will McDonald. So for a guy at that size to not be as strong is concerning. I was impressed with him being mostly a full-time rusher, what he can do dropping into short zones. Like that's good. That's promising because when he plays more of that Sam role, he's going to be asked to do that a lot more often than he was in college. So as long as he's serviceable, he's not getting killed, he can kind of keep in line with guys that if someone does make a catch in his zone, he can make the tackle. He's a pretty good tackler. The thing that bugged me on him is I feel like he didn't win a lot of reps and make a lot of big plays. And oftentimes I had this weird observation with him where it felt like I was watching him go one-on-one with a guy and he got so hyper-focused on that one-on-one matchup. So for anyone who has never been through a college practice or a high school practice, more often than in college, you have a separate period of practice where the offensive line goes against the defensive line and it's one-on-ones. And I felt like I was watching Nick Hampton go one-on-one with his tackle and like he was doing a one-on-one drill, and then the play was just kind of happening. And he was just getting so caught up in this hand battle, this fight that he was having. So I need more finishing from him. Like, I just don't get that. More completing reps, winning those one-on-ones, and then making those big plays. Some of the sacks that he had, I think it was the Coastal game, he did have a little bit more of an open room to make a play on the ball. So I'm not willing to invest a ton into this guy because he's not like a big splash player. To your point, more of a role player in a specific scheme.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's perfect, right? Like, he is in a 4-3 alignment in some type of base. Because, look, man, at the end of the day, most NFL teams, I think this year there was one team that played base more than 50% of the time, right? So with a league that just doesn't play a ton of base defense, on those base downs, he has to play Sam linebacker. Like, this isn't a kid on running downs that I want to play on the edge. Like, it's just not, because I don't think he has the play strength, and I don't think he just has the body type to do that all the time. But as a Sam linebacker, to play on the second level, to move in space a little bit, I think he can get the job done in that role. But more than anything, his approach early on is designated pass rusher and special teamer. And I would want him on my roster because I do think he gives you some juice as a pass rusher, as an outside track guy. Again, though, I think it just depends on a team needs to understand the role that you need a Nick Hampton to play. Like, you need to understand it. Because if you put him into a system that he's not going to be able to fill correctly, and I think of like a 4-3 alignment where you just go, hey, man, you're just on the ball all the time, like, it's not going to end up incredibly well. But we've seen guys, I mean, like, Joe, I mean, have we even talked about James Houston this season for the Detroit Lions, who was like a 7th round pick out of Jackson State, an edge rusher, designated pass rusher. But he quietly has 8 sacks, which is more than what Aiden Hutchinson has, right? So I think that Nick Hampton could be that type of player. Not an every down edge, but a DPR early on in his career, and it has to play some Sam linebacker stuff. I think that's what we're looking at here.
So to wrap us up, my grade on him, 5th round pick.
That's fine.
I think that he's got some traits. Yeah. He's got some tools. The lack of finishing, the lack of play awareness is what drops him for me. I didn't know his arms were that long. I don't know why.
Inches.
I thought I need access to the data that you have.
So he had, I was looking at it before we started, and he had what was his wingspan? His wingspan was pretty nice, man. Yeah, he has 34-inch arms even, at least he did in the spring. And I mean, it usually goes higher than that at this time of year. 81 and a quarter wingspan, man. So he's got some long arms, man. He got some length to him. So, yeah.
I mean, taking that into account, still fourth, 5th round pick.
Yeah.
More of a role player, high upside special teams guy. And then to your point, role player, rotational pass rusher. That's it for me. So where do you see him?
Yeah. I had a 4th round grade on him as well. So we're in like the same ballpark. Cause I think that for me, he's a player that as a pure rotational player could play early for you and give you an impact, but he's not a day one starter, right? Like, he's not that type of player. He might never even be a starter, right? Like, he might never be that guy, but he is a very valuable role player if he's developed properly from a body type perspective. He's able to put on a substantial amount of weight in a defense that maybe runs a little more 3 down, and he's able to be a true stand-up rusher in that system. I think he might have starter upside years down the line, but for now, he's a rotational player early in designated pass rush reps, and a guy that needs to find a home kind of on the second level as a Sam backer. So I think early day 3 is really good because you're not expecting this kid to come in and to have a massive impact on the game. You're just expecting him to play his role and play it well.
And we'll see what happens with Nick Hampton and Will McDonald. Folks, thanks for tuning in. At Joe DeLeone, at Rise and Draft. Make sure you head on over to Bet Online and use promo code BELIEVE to get that 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline.ag. We'll be back, folks. We've got more scouting reports coming your way this week.